Hello and welcome to the test screening. I'm Billy.
I'm Chloe. We're two film school graduates and cinephiles who can't seem to get enough of the big screen.
So now we're bringing you our weekly insights into the biggest releases, hottest topics, and forgotten classics every Monday.
Welcome to the test screening. This is our first episode. How are we doing, Billy?
I'm great. I'm very excited, both to be starting off the show and also because it's awards season. It's my favourite time of the movie-going year. There's just so much to soak up awards-wise and the biggest releases of the cinema year.
The first episode it's jam-packed. We've got so
Yeah,
much to talk about.
we have a lot. We have a lot to talk about. Start off strong. Start off with a lot to get through.
Okay, well let's not waste any time then. Let's go straight into hot topic of the week, BAFTA noms.
What are your general feelings on this? Mine are that they're pretty solid, with a couple nice little curveballs that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but that I'm really pleased about.
Generally, yes. There were a few raised eyebrows, and I think you know what my raised eyebrows were
The
about.
general presence of Elvis, by any chance?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's like I didn't hate it. It's definitely not the worst thing. Maybe not even the worst thing to come out this year, but I definitely thought it was an odd choice. I didn't enjoy it half as much as the others. And the thing that really I thought was unusual was the best editing nomination for Elvis.
Yeah, I mean, part of me, part of me feels that Baz Luhrmann's particular brand of just extravagant excess and just rapid fire, just assault on the senses style of editing. Uh, will be a great thrill to some people and really electrify the screen and provide a real entertaining, grab you by the wrist and pull you along experience. I mean, for me, it just cluttered the screen for me and changed my attention so much. It was kind of just like giving me cinematic whiplash. I didn't know where to look, and yeah, it just kind of spoiled the experience for me. Part of the electricity of concert sequences and action sequences and extravagant sequences in cinema in general is that we need time to soak in the grandiosity and scale of the situation. There really needs to be, in my opinion, more emphasis on wider angles that take in the geography of the sequence and hold more, so that a lot of cutting doesn't equate to thrill, in my opinion.
On to more positive things.
Yes.
What are the films that you're really pleased? The ones that give you joy to see getting recognised, what would they be?
The ones that make me punch the air out of excitement and go,
Yes.
yes. So I think the first, I mean, the obvious one out of the way is definitely Everything Everywhere All at Once. I mean, I thought that was just such an incredible, incredible movie when I first saw it. Just totally, if there was ever a moment when I, lost a bit of faith in the originality of modern cinema, you just point to that, and it just makes you go, yes, movies are still alive and well. Part of me was worried that it was going to be completely forgotten or sidelined come awards season, and it totally hasn't. The fact that it's tied for the second most nominations at the BAFTAs with 10 just proves that it is the awards heavyweight it absolutely should be, considering the incredibly high quality of it. The one that perhaps gives me the most joy, though, because I wasn't expecting it necessarily to get the awards love it rightfully deserves, is The Woman King. I thought
Yeah.
that was such an intelligent and well balanced uh, take on the old vintage style Hollywood blockbuster action film in the style of Cleopatra, or maybe a little bit Lawrence of Arabia, Heaven's Gate, that sort of style.
For me, The Woman King can gladly take Elvis's place on the best film
Yes.
nomination list. That's the place where I'd really like to see it. I am glad that it's getting some awards recognition. But for me, that one deserves to be there a bit more than Elvis. I just thought in general it was a better film.
Yeah, just in pretty much every way, a better film.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your last pick before we have to tear you away
Ooh,
from this list?
turn me away from the all the nominations. Oh, I'll tell you what. The Quiet Girl being in the best film not in the English language category. I am kind of in the minority in that. I mean, the big one that's pegged to win this is Decision to Leave. And I didn't dislike Decision to Leave, but given how big a fan I've been of Park Chan-wook's previous work, I really wanted to like Decision to Leave more than I did. I found the central relationship kind of impenetrable, and I thought it was far more stylishly and better directed than it was written. I think All Quiet on the Western Front is terrific. Wasn't crazy about Corsage. Argentina 1985 is very good. But The Quiet Girl, I saw that not midway through last year, not knowing a lot about it. Aside that it was in the Irish language, um, subtitled, and that isn't really something I've ever seen before, and that you see very often in contemporary cinema. And I was really, really taken with it. It was so beautifully poetic, so spacious, so tender, such nuanced and subtle takes on a child's connection with different sets of parents and how that can shape her upbringing, the impact of an environment and a home on her experiences, and also things like grief and starting a new chapter of life over. Yeah, just a wonderful, wonderful story, and I'm really glad it's getting some recognition here because it probably won't at the Oscars.
Before we finish the segment, I'd really like to do a little shout out for one of the short films nominated, The Ballad of Olive Morris. I was privileged enough to see this short at Bolton Film Festival. I also met the director, Alex Keode, a great guy, really kind. The film is really, really lovely. I actually posted about it when I saw it. It's a story that really needs to be told about a civil rights activist I'd never heard of, and as the director said himself in a Q&A afterwards, this is a story that should be taught in schools. So big up for him. This is an incredible achievement, and I wish him all the best of luck.
Great to see it getting some recognition.
Away from the bastards. The bastards.
The battle of
the BAFTA nom nom noms. Let's go on to our first film pick before I trip over myself anymore. So, first on our list, Billy, it's M3gan or M3gan.
M3gan, as I've heard it called.
M3gan.
on certain occasions. Yes, Megan, a sci-fi tinged satirical comedy horror film from director Gerard Johnston. The reason it's written as M3gan is because it stands for Model 3 Generative Android, I think it is, something like that. It's to do with the name of the doll that's at the center of the film. The plot is essentially that a young girl, Katie, is in an accident with a snowplow on a skiing holiday with her parents. They are both killed. She survives and is sent to live with her aunt, who is granted temporary custody of her as her guardian. Her aunt Gemma is woefully unprepared to take care of her. She works at a toy manufacturer, kind of building robot toys that in the recent models have been growing in sophistication and intelligence and ability to interact with children. And she sees an opportunity to kind of kill two birds with one stone in crafting a companion that sort of supersedes her in terms of being able to take care of Katie and also make her a boatload of money and kind of send her career into the stratosphere. So she makes this doll called Megan, who resembles a young girl, but is able to kind of like scour the internet and data pools and respond intuitively to the behavior of Katie and the world around her. And at first it works a dream, but as with any story revolving around artificial intelligence and also creepy dolls, things don't quite go to plan, and Megan gets a little bit too intelligent for her own good. Obviously, films about possessed and violent dolls aren't anything new. I mean, recently we've had
Chucky.
Yeah, of course, we immediately go to Child's Play, the Chucky films. I mean, recently we've had Annabelle in the Conjuring franchise. In more classic territory, we have Dead of Night. My mum always refers to Magic as, haunting her dreams as a little girl, the Anthony Hopkins movie. And also that horrifying clown doll in the original Poltergeist.
Oh, that I
Yeah,
think Poltergeist was the first kind of horror film that I ever watched, and like even though it's pretty tame, like it still freaks me out. It still freaks me
yeah,
out to this day.
yeah. Me too. It definitely has
Damn
like
doll.
it has kind of a Steven Spielberg kind of whimsy and kind of childlike slant to it, which kind of makes it, I think, a more child-friendly horror film. But yeah, it
Mm.
still holds the power to shock and disturb. I think even to this day, especially that clown doll. Ugh. So
Ugh.
we are in familiar horror territory, but what Megan brings to the table is first a really wryly satirical and dark, fun sense of humor that melds really well with the morbidity of the subject matter and the more horror tinged sequences that come later. But also this really fresh and interesting and I think insightful perspective on technology, the invasiveness of technology in our efforts to effectively communicate with other people, and how we may use it to enhance that, but ultimately it may end up obstructing our emotional connections. You get these really interesting observations that are really nicely placed within the screenplay. Megan's interface when she sees and analyzes a person, we kind of get these POV shots where the emotions of that person she's looking at are categorized. Frustration, confusion, happiness, despair, things like that, and they're given a numerical value to quantify the potency of that emotion. Interesting kind of idea of quantifying human emotion and sort of reducing that down to a numerical value. And also just this humorous sequence where um, Katie asks Gemma to read her a bedtime story, and she goes, "Oh, well, I don't have any paper books because our house is just filled to the nines with the latest tech." And she goes, "Oh, I can pull one up on my phone. Oh, but I have to update the app." And then there's this really awkward silence and this really perfectly placed wide, where it's just like the awkwardness of that situation, and again this technological inconvenience that you know puts a gap, puts like a block in between that that nurturing moment.
I guess with the whole like the debate around AI and technology recently, I mean, recently we had the whole chatbot debate about kids using AI chatbots to do their school essays and things like that. So it's really kind of captured a moment. I think this film where we're kind of seeing this more intelligent, AI stuff that I mean, I think, am I wrong in thinking that this film kind of lends a little bit of itself to the film AI? The whole like little boy, the Steven Spielberg one, and you get like, I mean, obviously their version of the future is very different from our version of the future. We're kind of living it, which I think makes it all the more unnerving.
No, I think that comparison is absolutely valid. I mean, I think in the case of AI, I think that movie is kind of interestingly about tolerance and how, not being judgmental of where something comes from and whether or not it's artificial. I think in the case of Megan, it's more kind of about, technology running away with itself. Yes, Megan is incredibly sophisticated in the way she can respond to human emotion and behavior and say things that can help and support someone if they're feeling sad, for example. But in the end, that is coming from a place of I'm analyzing, a pool of data, and my words and the language I'm communicating with is coming from a pre-written code, and it's kind of like randomly stitched together. It is coming from a place of a place of artifice, and it's kind of like what happens when that becomes too sophisticated. It's a really interesting topic. On the topic again of Megan, because I do come back to her a lot. She's such a great character design. I mean, just looking at the poster, she's incredibly striking, and I think there's like two main reasons for that. She has this really cold, emotionless face that pairs really well with like the devilish intelligence of her character. Because I mean, immediately we look at that face and go, "Oh, the ski mask, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, cold, emotionless." But when you pair that with a wit and a sophistication of mind, then that becomes really frightening because it's challenging to read exactly what she's thinking or feeling, which lends this inherent tension to even the most relaxed of dialogue scenes because we aren't given a reprieve from the unpredictability of her dialogue or behavior. She's kind of just ever present in the back of these dialogue scenes, and we don't know what she's going to come out with or really how she's interpreting the situation. So it's kind of like, is she going to snap and savage someone? at any given moment. You know, her presence casts this shadow of discomfort, and but simultaneously she has these incredibly deep, enveloping eyes that pull you in. It's kind of the idea of an impending disaster, a car crash that you can't look away from. You know something bad's going to happen, but your vision can't be like deterred from it.
Okay, so Megan, what are we rating it? Where are we putting it?
For January big studio released horror film which have a history of being bad, you know, I'm this impressed me. This it was better than expected. I'm going to give it a solid B+.
Keeping to this, we're going to keep on the horror genre then for this next one. Let's talk a little bit about this film Piggy. I was looking this up on IMDb. I've not seen the film. Really interesting concept.
So Piggy is about a Spanish teenage girl called Sarah who is overweight. She works at her parents' local butcher. So, you know, naturally there's quite an easy target for brutal school children to like really mercilessly mock her. She is a victim of a really harrowing bullying incident at the local swimming pool and is forced to run home along a, you know, very isolated, you know, path in just her swimsuit. And she sees a situation where it looks as though the bullies have been the victim of a crime, and she may be able to provide some information as to their whereabouts. And of course, there's an ensuing investigation, and it's all about how she kind of responds to that situation. I went into Piggy thinking it was going to be kind of this Heathers-esque. I mean, the poster, this very kind of striking image of Sarah completely doused in blood, made me think it was going to kind of revel in the violence and invite us to kind of almost have this sadistic, take pleasure in her wreaking a brutal revenge on the bullies.
Like Carrie vibes, like it does kind of invoke.
Yes, Carrie vibes. What I actually got, which was much more surprising and I think a lot more gripping, was it's I mean, it does have comedic elements to it. Some sequences that kind of, you know, when she's at home, that kind of poke a little bit of fun at her weight and how she responds to certain situations, not in a knowing or mean-spirited way, but kind of like a little bit of screwball comedy-esque. But it really kind of digs into the turmoil and sort of moral dilemma she has and the moral complexity and murkiness of that situation. You know, she's been targeted and treated really horrifically by these people, and, you know, in a moment where she can kind of see them get their comeuppance, and, you know, she's ridiculed by most of the community and isn't really close to their parents. You know, when she's tormented by so many people, how does she then respond? And can we really blame her for wanting, you know, to see some of these people get punished, even if it is through means that aren't, you know, legal or moral? It has a really, I mean, there's kind of this blunt, slightly muted colors and this very kind of this 4:3 aspect ratio and these very kind of blunt, matter of fact visuals and cinematography gives it a not picturesque and not, you know, whimsical, satirical tone. And it brilliantly dials up the tension throughout the film to a fever pitch. You know, the community gets more and more riled up, really starts to quicken towards the final act. And the final third or so, particularly the extended sort of two final sequences, is one of the most intense stretches of a film, you know, in any genre really, I've seen in a while. It has the thing it reminded me of, it had sort of the tinge of industrial brutality of a French horror film, new French extremity movement film called Martyrs from 2008. And that film is kind of seen as having a high watermark for oppressiveness and brutality in the horror genre. I mean, it's not nearly as gory, Piggy, where it kind of goes, but it's not easy. It's no mean feat to invoke that level of discomfort within a viewer, and where it kind of takes her character in the end, it doesn't take the easy route. Every time I thought I kind of knew where we were heading character arc wise, it tripped me up. This complexity of character in a situation I think we've seen before in the horror genre, that I think it didn't take the easy route, and it didn't give me any easy answers with regards to how she responded to the situation, and I really appreciated that. And it made me squirm, and it's not easy to make me squirm in a horror film.
What's your rating then for Piggy?
Oh, I think it's an A-. I think it kind of crept up on me how impressed I was by it as it went along, and I'm definitely feeling that rating at the end of it.
Okay, so moving away from horror now into romance and Empire of Light, directed by Sam Mendes. So this one's got Olivia Colman in it, which usually in my book means that it's worth a watch. But what were your thoughts?
So, given the subject matter, I was really quite excited for this. Essentially, we open in 1980 in a cinema in an English coastal town, and Olivia Colman is this very kind of weary, kind of worn down woman who's kind of struggling through life. She works in, the titular cinema, Empire Cinema. She's kind of mistreated by the men in her life, and she's kind of lost her way in terms of really knowing what she wants to get out of her life and her ambitions. And then a local boy starts by the name of Stephen. He starts at the cinema, and he kind of opens up her eyes to the wonder of movies, and also through a budding romance and a growing connection, they sort of allow each other to foster a new lease on life and give each other new perspectives, and which sounds like a recipe for a really engaging story. It immediately makes me think of things like Cinema Paradiso, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. A young boy who befriends the projectionist in the cinema, and how that then inspires his love of cinema. Also made me think of The Purple Rose of Cairo, one of Woody Allen's best films. About Mia Farrow, and how the cinema provides a reprieve from her and her abusive relationship with her husband. There's a tried and tested formula of really emotive human stories, and how cinema and filmmaking in the periphery of that central human relationship can be really powerful and really, really captivating. It's clear that Sam Mendes has a great reverence for the titular cinema and the material. The heart and soul he's clearly put into this project shines forth on screen. We get this opening sequence, this really kind of slow, patient, meditative montage of the kind of the cordons in the cinema, the seats in the auditorium, the sweep machines, all collecting dust, kind of almost relics of a bygone era, and the score, which is just so stunning and just beautifully communicates this sense of a time capsule that now glistens as the lights are switched on and the cinema is brought to life. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, beautifully capture through these lush full pianos and these plucked stringed harmonics this sense of rediscovery, a gentle rejuvenation of a neglected passion, a reacquaintance with a forgotten interest. And a later sequence, Sam Mendes with pitch point accuracy so greatly captures the clockwork like mechanisms and all the various elements that go together into projecting a film, and how the camera works and everything, and someone in the audience having an incredibly transportative emotive experience watching. I think the being there as the film they're watching in the cinema. These two sequences are extraordinarily moving, and everything I wanted the film to be. Unfortunately, the rest of the film is nowhere near as engaging as either of those sequences.
What a shame.
Yeah, I was really, really disappointed. And I think for a couple of different reasons. I've heard a couple of different critics cite this issue. It feels like five different films rolled into one. There's a plot line about mental illness, there's a plot line about racism, given that Michael Ward, who plays Stephen, given the social climate the film takes place in, there's that plot line, there's the romance, there's the Toby Jones's passionate cinema projectionist and the love for cinema, and also just the coming of age story. And unfortunately, the two least interesting of those plot lines end up getting the lion's share of the screen time. And I understand that Sam Mendes, he said in interviews that the script kind of organically evolved into something that didn't entirely resemble the previous project. But I think what it's ended up coalescing into is a film that is kind of structurally muddled. Arcs come to what feels like their natural conclusion, and yet we're only about halfway through the film, and they kind of peter out. And I get that life doesn't always happen in a straight line, but I think there's a fine line between a Richard Linklater or Paul Thomas Anderson-esque freewheeling slice of life structure, and something that feels structurally disheveled. It also doesn't help the central romance. I just never believed in it at all. I think Olivia Colman is a national treasure. She's a wonderful actress, and she does the best to inject the role with a lot of layers and a lot of nuance and a lot of range of emotion. Michael Ward brings a great sense of youthful optimism and sprightly energy to the role. But despite their best effort to play off one another, I never felt they were anything less than just totally mismatched due to the total lack of romantic chemistry between them, which I think is a real shame. And some cringeworthy dialogue. There's an outburst scene with Olivia Colman that just doesn't work and feels as though it's trying far too hard to be caustic and venomous and shocking, and actually it's just just jars.
My mind instantly just goes to that that scene from The Favourite where she's like, "Look at me, look at me! How could you look at me?"
Within the confines of a film like The Favourite, which has very caustic wit, totally works, but in this it just felt mismatched. And each plot line receiving not enough development really ended up meaning that a lot of the dramatic moments just didn't land. They either felt melodramatic or like that they came out of nowhere. So yeah, I was very disappointed with this.
Where are we calling it? Where are we putting it?
I think overall, I mean, the score is lovely. There are some great sequences. I mean, obviously it's lensed by Roger Deakins, so it looks beautiful. I think a C plus. I mean, I said very disappointed. I think overall it was just okay because there are admirable things about it, but yeah, just didn't quite cohere into a solid picture at the end for me.
So now we're going to go back a little bit to the strange and unnerving with Enys Men. And I've watched the trailer for this, and it seems just up my street. Like the visual style of this, it's giving me like creepy, mystery, kind of weird, good unconventional thriller slash horror. So tell us a bit about Enys Men.
I mean, I thought it was also called Enys Men. I mean, actually, I found out since that it's pronounced Enys Men, which is means Stone Island, which is actually quite pertinent to the themes of the film. It's Mark Jenkins' new film. Many will remember that he kind of splashed onto the scene with Bates, a tale of gentrification and the fishing industry in Cornwall, shot on 16mm clockwork cameras with entirely post-synced sound design, which gave a uniquely tactile edge to the whole style of the film. And this is similarly shot with 16mm film stock and post-synced sound, although it is in wonderfully vibrant, scintillating color now, and very much shows Mark Jenkins going less down the social drama route and more into the realms of folk horror, like you say. Now, I wouldn't go as far to say it's reductive to talk about the film in terms of plot, but it certainly it might not sound like a lot when you initially describe it, but there's a lot more going on beneath the surface beyond the plot description I'm about to say. It's essentially a woman named only as the volunteer in the credits, stationed on an island off the coast of Cornwall, stationed there to take readings and observe a very rare outcrop of flowers. She also has in 1973, she also has a ritual whereby she drops a stone down a mine shaft and goes back to her very isolated home, which is overlooked by this very angular and sharp protruding rock from the landscape. And she reads a book called The Blueprint for Survival. And then there's kind of this weird tagline underneath the book where it says, after you read this book, nothing will ever be the same. And you can almost say that about the film and how you come out of the film. A slight mistake I had while watching it was to maybe try too hard from the outset to overly analyze it. I think, it's rife with symbolism, and I think there's a lot you can pull out of it, which I think I want to watch it again because I think I might pull even more ideas out of it upon a second viewing. But I think to anybody going in to see this, I would advise to just really let the spelling atmosphere just wash over you. It's such a dreamlike, eerie film, and just puts you in a really strange, interesting state. The lo-fi, sometimes brittle and abrasive tone of the crackling, transistor radio she uses, the ethereal ambient wails in the sound design, the texture crackle of the radio, the apocalyptic rotund booms and echoes that explode from rocks, the falling from the coast and the mountains. So much of the storytelling is to do with the landscape. The camera contorts and distorts the landscape, and how the cultural history, which seems so baked into the geography of the location, then sort of comes forth as Mary Woodvine's character, that's the actress who plays the volunteer, how she starts to lose grip on reality, and sort of dream and real life sort of start to merge. And again, the fluidity and dexterity with which dream and reality are flipped between and moved in and out of by Jenkin is really quite remarkable. The softly vibrant colors are really beautiful to look at.
It's interesting that you kind of mentioned like heritage and like the scenery, because I mean you mentioned before, that kind of genre folk horror. There's been some fantastic and quite iconic folk horror films over the years. I mean, Wicker Man, obviously. For some reason, when I looked at the trailer for this, Don't Look Now came to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I have that in my notes here, actually. The Wicker Man, obviously, because of the island setting. The red, vibrant coat that she wears screams "Don't Look Now."
Yeah, I
Which,
think that was
yeah,
probably my frame of reference as well.
yeah. I mean, thematically, that can be very nicely tied into this, because there's a very I think you can interpret it in a number of ways. A cautionary tale of becoming too divorced from where you've come from, your heritage, your cultural history. Um, how oftentimes in cinema we don't see this sort of raw, rugged portrait of Cornwall that we get in this film. I think you can do like a more general, universal take on isolation. Also, there's a grief angle which links in with Don't Look Now. Yeah, I just think this is just a wonderful cinematic puzzle. And interestingly, there's almost kind of this Wes Anderson-esque, symmetry to some of the shots, which just makes it very aesthetically pleasing, but also gives it an angular edge as an influence. It's got that David Lynch kind of puzzle element to it, where he hasn't explained the film's meaning in interviews, and it kind of just leaves us to delve into the metaphors. I do think, if I have a couple of reservations about Enys Men, there are two main ones that come to mind. I do think that because, I mean, like I said, a lot of the storytelling is to do with the geography, but I do think there's a key human element that Mary Woodvine's character, brings to the story. And I think that because a good chunk of the narrative arc is to do with her internalized journey, I feel like her performance needed to make a greater effort to physically, externalize those emotions and, create a bigger, clearer rapport to me in terms of how her character and her mental state responds to the environment around her. I would have liked to see, that become a bit more apparent. And I do think that parts of the film, particularly early on, I mean, part of the plot is to do with, cycles and the rituals that she goes through and how that affects her and how the landscape responds to her. I did feel like, even with a pretty brisk 87-minute runtime, I did feel like certain parts of the film were padded out and were stretched. And whilst, in the back end of the film, some wonderfully twisted, creepy, and kind of demented almost and striking visuals come into play, I did feel like some earlier portions of the film did test my patience a bit. But I feel like now that I'm acclimatized to the atmosphere, I feel like I would probably get a lot more out of and be more instantaneously pulled into a repeat viewing.
Do you think that Mark Jenkins' overall goal, his cinematic goal, is to make sure people don't visit Cornwall? It's just like he's making Cornwall look weirder and weirder every film he makes. There's murder, there's weird things happening in Cornwall, y'all. That's the message that I get from
Yeah.
Mark Jenkins.
I think it's very admirable what he's doing, because I think Cornwall is, I think at least in my experience, written off as just a seaside town, very picturesque, kind of place of sunshine and sea and family getaways. And I think he wants people to see the complexity of it, and how layered it is as a place, and how it isn't just this really superficial view that people have kind of reduced it down to. And I love that he's bringing that sort of new perspective on a place I think we all think we know so well.
So what are we giving to Enys Men? Main, I said it right this time.
I think my initial score was a B plus. The more I think about it, the more I'm edging towards an A minus. But I think I will I will wait to watch it again before I fully confirm that.
Okay, staying with the weird and the wonderful.
Oh yes, Nocebo. So this is quite an interesting one. Eva Green plays a fashion designer. At the advent of one of her big shows, and she specializes in sort of pageantry for children, dressing kids of different ethnicities in very kind of plush, expensive clothing. And she's bitten by a tick, which then appears to make her very ill. She then has to take an extended period of time away from work with her husband and her daughter. So she is then visited unexpectedly by a Filipino nanny who offers her services to her in terms of looking after her daughter. And she brings her in. There's a big question about whether or not Eva Green's character is ill, or if she's self-medicating, or it's a psychological condition. The nanny decides to show her some Filipino kind of rituals and alternative kind of methods of, arguably curing her, but there appears to be an ulterior motive at heart. Now, this was when I initially read about this film, there was kind of this advertisement and selling of this idea that the film was about appearance versus reality, again, gentrification, this idea of, the privileged white person, fashion designer kind of dressing, ethnic people of poorer, impoverished backgrounds, and raising them up onto this pedestal and ultimately profiting off of that, despite the fact that they come from very underprivileged backgrounds. It was then surprising to me that for a large portion of the film, it seemed more concerned with Eva Green's mental state. Now that isn't necessarily a bad thing, and also again, the kind of the strange sort of connection she then builds up with the nanny character. The husband is quite adverse to this because she's like, well, I never knew about this. You never asked me about it, bringing her on. And that in itself could be very compelling. Now, one of the big issues here is that essentially the dialogue is badly written, and the performances are really stilted, and not stilted in a kind of a way like the film The Killing of a Sacred Deer, where that film's dialogue is so robotically delivered and so cold and so emotionless that it's very clearly a stylistic choice. It's a very kind of insular, isolating, kind of oppressive film. This just came across as just, again, like I said, just shoddily put together. And the reason I say the dialogue is badly written is, one, it all sounds very unnatural and very kind of melodramatic. And also, I can't remember seeing a film recently that had so much emotional exposition in it. Characters saying exactly how they feel, or bursting out with a line about how tormented they are. Even in empty rooms. This is like the direct opposite of show don't tell. I don't want to be told what the characters are thinking or feeling through this really obvious, eye roll inducing dialogue. I want the direction, especially in a horror film. I want the camera and the way they interact with each other in the environment sort of to bring that subtextual material in.
Something that kind of occurred to me when I was looking at it was the use of this kind of trope, and it's kind of an old-fashioned trope in a way, because I haven't seen it done for a long time. But this whole, having a foreigner, or someone from a different background, kind of possessing these kind of weird witch doctor voodoo powers, and kind of how that represents culture, or are we stereotyping here? So I was just wondering, as someone who's seen the film, is this film one like falling into that trap, or is it kind of subverting that?
I think in a way it subverts it a bit. I mean, I think part of the issue is that it doesn't subvert it enough until the last 15 minutes, which I will be sure to get onto in a moment. But I do think that the fact that it is kind of becoming a trope does kind of make me think, at least, that in horror cinema that can lead to some interesting social commentary. But I would hate for an ethnic characters and characters from underrepresented backgrounds to be wholly defined by this characteristic. I would want the culture that they come from to make up more of their character arc than simply being a villain and using that, to demonstrate their villainy.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like even in films that aren't horror. I mean, for some reason my mind kind of. I mean, obviously I'm talking about a Chinese character here, but in Freaky Friday, the whole magic comes from like some Chinese witch magic, and it's just kind of clearly written by a white person. It's like that's so obviously written by that what a white person kind of perceives to be mystical or otherness. And yeah, it is a bit of a worrying trope, so it's interesting that this is kind of using that. I guess I'd have to kind of watch the film to see in what way it utilizes it.
Yeah. The thing that the big talking point for me with Nocebo is the final sort of 15 minutes. And again, I'm not going to get into plot spoiler territory here, but at the 75-minute mark, it runs about 90 minutes. At the 75-minute mark, I was really starting to lose patience with it because there really isn't, like I said, the issues with the dialogue, the lack of depth in the relationships, no real building of tension despite some kind of nice sort of vibrant visuals, color-wise at least. Yeah, I was really just kind of done with it, and I wanted it to be over. But the final 15 minutes are amazing. They're like from a different film. Some of the most demented, the film's most demented camera work comes out. The tension flies through the roof. The social commentary comes out in full force. The backstory becomes revealed. The film really throws forward its hand and goes full tilt into horror territory. It really seeks to discomfort the viewer. It really sort of shouts, from the rafters about its message and what it's trying to do. The visual techniques it uses to show all that, and the kind of the actiony parts it gets into are really thrilling, and pretty much all the metaphors and symbolism that have been kind of sort of haphazardly sprinkled throughout the rest of the screenplay are all fully explained. And yeah, it's frustrating because I'm like, where was this energy and conviction the rest of the way through? There's a big difference between a slow burn that then, punches you in the face at the end and really capitalizes on that building tension, and a film that just is tedious and then sprints for the finish and, ends up feeling like too little too late. And that's really what this felt like. And, part of me may appreciate on a rewatch, the motivations of the characters being apparent through the earlier portions. But even then, I really don't think there is much to pick apart there in terms of depth or actions and behavior that would be seen in a different light, because just the simplicity and benignness of some of the interaction kind of written earlier on. Yeah, it was just kind of a shame. It did certainly not notch my score up a little bit than what I would have given it had it not just exploded in that final portion, but not enough really to save it in the end. Yeah, a real missed opportunity, I think. Nocebo.
What is that score?
A C plus. I think it would have been a C minus had it not been for that final 15 minutes. But again, it wasn't enough to pull it out of mediocrity for me.
Okay, so we are getting to our final couple of reviews now. Let's do another biggie. And this is a film that I have been excited for ever since it was announced, because I am a huge Cate Blanchett fan. And
I mean, who isn't?
I mean, exactly, who isn't a Cate Blanchett fan? But yeah, Tar. I can't wait. I can't wait to watch this. So please tell me that it's good, Billy. Tell me it's good.
Well, I don't think you'll be disappointed at all. This is being tipped as a heavy Oscar favourite, both in terms of the picture as a whole, Todd Fields' direction, Cate Blanchett's performance, potentially picking up her third best actress Oscar. Well, second best actress Oscar. She also has a supporting actress Oscar for The Aviator. But this would equal her with Meryl Streep.
Two queens. Can we just appreciate those two women for a moment? Let's just a moment of silence, please, for Meryl Streep and Kate Blanchett.
Just two of my absolute favorite actresses, because they just disappear into the roles that they take on. And I think, like Daniel Day-Lewis, they just totally inhabit the characters fully that they take on, and you utterly, completely believe in whatever they're putting across on screen. So yes, a lot of heavy, and this has been scooping awards from like the critic circles, left and right. There's a lot of expectation placed on Tar, and I have to say, for me, it totally lived up to the hype, but also managed to subvert my expectations in a couple of interesting ways. It's set in the international world of highbrow, elitist classical music. It centers on Lydia Tarr, who is obviously a fictional composer. She's considered one of the greatest living composers working in classical music in the present day of the film. She's a protege of Leonard Bernstein. She's like been decorated by every award circle in the classical music world. She is one of the EGOT winners, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony, and has played with almost every major orchestra there is. And is a central plot point in the film is that she is gearing up for her latest big concert, which I think is sort of checking off the last box on the list of all the big orchestras and residencies that she's going to lead. It also happens that even though she's clearly a total genius, she's also kind of a total monster. She's manipulative. She's abusive, she's a tyrant. The film then seeks to try and unpack that, examine the argument between, separating the artist from the art. Is the way, she behaves, is that kind of intrinsically linked to the way she constructs her art? Again, a meditation on cancel culture. A lot of ink has been spilled, very rightly, on how the film looks at these various topics. I do believe that even though that those are clearly very pertinent to the film, I think there's another angle which isn't necessarily being talked about enough with relation to the film's story. She's clearly, there's a central part of the story that revolves around, previous accusations of a history of, grooming and abusing, comes out about her, and she kind of feels as though people are conspiring to tear apart her life and to, suppress and destroy her next performance. I think the film really expertly walks this tightrope, deconstructing her as a character and looking at the really poisonous effect she has on the people around her, but also, I think, looking at the environment that I think creates that abusive personality, and the oppressive environment of being alone at the top of that podium, and how that can mold and birth that poisonous personality. And the opening shot of Tar places her sleeping on a private jet on one side of the frame, next to an iPhone, which is her assistant speaking to a friend, who kind of says, "Oh, you're still getting along. You're still getting along. No, she's doing this and doing that." Again, this look, the conflict between the public's perception of her and who she really is as a person. And I think there are, this tug of war between, artist and critique of that artist. And I think there are several aspects of Todd Field's direction that just display masterful precision in unpacking the duality of that subject matter. The insular and icy tone he's able to conjure, shrouds us in the oppressive grip and feeling that Lydia radiates across every space that she's in. The film's shot in 239 widescreen, and most angles utilize the full capability of that ratio in showing the vastness and heft of the spaces and the auditoriums and the classical music venues and opera houses that she operates in, and the rehearsal spaces with these extreme wide. I think they can simultaneously be shown as presenting the weight and overbearing nature of her presence, and how her volatile personality completely fills that space, but also how alone she is, how isolated she is. There are also dialogue scenes where they're filmed with these kind of sharp diagonal angles. For me, they were placed in this adversarial context. Lydia Tarr is talking to like a rival, in one case played by Mark Strong, and they're sort of verbally sparring, almost if they're trying to one up each other. Like this is a battle. It's a verbal battle at this sort of restaurant table. It's almost as though she is so heavily scrutinized that she becomes bitter and volatile. And
I've just realised that we've got double Mark Strong on the
yes, we
podcast
do
today.
have a
He's also
we
in
do have a
Nocebo.
we do have double Mark Strong. I mean, in quality wise, a completely different ends of the spectrum. But yes, these kind of like these very kind of, she becomes very hostile and very defensive in these scenarios, and these kind of very, very wide static shot. I felt the scrutiny on her, even in sequences when she wasn't being interviewed or wasn't being deconstructed by. The film begins with a very, very long interview sequence, and even past the scenes where she's being analyzed and deconstructed by people she works with, members of the classical music community. I felt like that the eyes were on her even when she was completely alone. At the center of it all is this extraordinary performance by Kate Blanchett. The rapid fire barrage of her pretentious artistic statements to prove her genius and assert her dominance in the conducting world are incredibly demanding. These very, very long-winded monologues, very captivating. She delivers them with such vitriol and the attention-grabbing nature of like a drill sergeant. And the very fact that she's a conductor emphasizes that need for control as well. She reaches for the rafters in several scenes, these ruptured outbursts of caustic criticism of the people in her orchestra, and also students when she's sort of doing workshops at universities. When she's conducting the orchestra in rehearsal, her movement and physical command is rapturous. It's as though the music has taken complete control of her, as though she's possessed, her body contorting and flailing around, as overcome with emotion from the music and that determination to win. And she's taken into another state of being. These muscular moments of performance are greatly impactful, but it's her subtler pieces of acting that really complete that performance for me. She's such a tyrant and so monstrous in so many other scenes, but take an abuser and make her empathetic and make her nuanced, and make it so that in some ways I do think she is a bit of a victim. I think that there's a debate to be had there, but I do feel as though it's not just as cut and dry as she ruins lives. I think the industry and the situation she's been put in have done a lot to shape that. The quiet, tortured moments of introspection she has, the trepidation in an early scene, before attending an interview where she tries to muster a lot of confidence, the gradual crumbling of her composure, and flashes of a person who does seem genuinely loving and compassionate in some brief moments, and I think so cohesively and mesmerizingly in a way that I utterly believed every part of her performance and who she was, to be able to weave through those various layers of an incredibly complex character, and sell all those facets of inhabiting the same person and elicit empathy in a character who is at times incredibly unsympathetic. I think in my mind, as much as I love Michelle Yeoh in Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think the consensus is that she is going to clinch Best Actress, and she absolutely deserves it. I mean, this, in my mind, is the most impressive feat of acting I've seen this year by a mile. And yes, just the really sophisticated way that Todd Field doesn't give us the easy answers. I mean, so much of the storytelling is, again, just this passive camera and the way it kind of presents the environment and her perception of it, and Kate Blanchett's performance. I think we're encouraged as viewers to deconstruct that scenario for ourselves. And I think that makes it a really, really fascinating piece of filmmaking. Also, just the way, we are almost as perplexed as her when people start to peel away from her life, as though we have been brought into her obsession so vividly. We're almost kind of like we didn't notice when people left and sort of fed up and had enough. And that's really powerful as well. I think easily one of the best and most impactful films I've seen this year. It also doesn't, despite its very deliberate pace, it doesn't feel its 2 hour and 35-minute runtime. Just fantastic. I think I've put it in at my third favorite film of the year. I think rating wise, I think I would give it my esteemed sought after A+ rating.
Handing out A pluses so early in the game, Billy. It's episode 1.
Well, episode 1, yeah. I hadn't occurred to me actually, but
Already
I
giving
think
out
there.
those A pluses. Well,
Yeah.
high
I think
praise
there
indeed.
have been a couple this year. But I'm sure we'll be talking about them maybe when we come to round up the Oscars, and also my best of the year list.
We've got time for one final review. So we're going to talk about Till.
Till is a historical drama based on the life of Emmett Till and Mammy Till Mobley, his mother. Based on a true story, obviously, very well known true story. Emmett Till was So a young black teenager from Chicago who went to visit his family down in the South in Mississippi, I believe, and was, despite his mother's best efforts to protect him and try and fill him with the knowledge to be safe and wary down in that part of the world, he was unfortunately singled out and horrifically attacked and lynched and set upon by a group of white men, and actually in the film revealed to be some black men as well. They so viciously attacked him, and I believe threw him into a river as well, that by the time that he was discovered, he was so horrendously physically deformed. And his mother, in the most unbelievable display of strength, said, no, I mean, no, we are not going to give him a closed casket, despite what everyone is telling me to do. Here is an opportunity to, as I think he would have wanted, show what happens in this part of the world, and when racism and hatred, grows so unbelievably out of control. And it was published in magazines, and there was a very famous magazine cover or newspaper cover, his stepfather and Mammy over his dead body in the mortuary. And he became, after his death, a sort of symbol of the civil rights movement. And this examines the lead up to his death, and also the ensuing court case and the trial of the people who were involved in his torture and murder. First of all, it's incredibly tough subject matter, and I think it deals with it with a lot of sensitivity. Danielle Deadweiler's performance, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, apologies if I'm not. Her performance is wonderful. The steadfast strength of her personality, but also the wariness of her worry for sending Emmett into that part of the world, and her grief, her loss of composure, her torment is so palpable, and so much of it is done in her eyes, in these kind of small facial gestures. It's a very nuanced performance. There are other scenes where she gets to really, display that strength and that force of character. These very big monologues on kind of stages at civil rights movements and newspaper reports, and she does all of it, incredibly well. And you feel her pain, but you also feel her drive and her determination to try and effect a change and get justice for her son. And she really is the heart of the film. Yeah, she's wonderful in it. There are some really effective directorial flourishes. How the film goes handheld during the scene where Emmett is taken. This kind of whimsical, bright, nostalgic sequence. I think the opening sequence, looking up at them in a car, showing them as incredibly free, carefree, and enjoying their time together, and bright and optimistic. And then how the score, the sharp violin growing, ever dissonant, showing how, foreshadowing how that would eventually be soured and ultimately destroyed by Emmett's murder. I do have some reservations. I don't think it entirely escapes the trappings of a courtroom drama and a historical biopic. Structurally, in the latter half, I did feel like it was settling into some motions that I was familiar with, in terms of, they bring in the witnesses, everyone kind of like worries, and then they go away, they try and gather the evidence. There's some emotional scenes between the families, kind of unpacking everyone's feelings about it, about the tragedy and what they could have maybe done differently, and then back to the courtroom. And despite that, I do think it does do it very serviceably, and does it and executes it very well and very solidly. The score, it lays on the pathos very thick in certain sequences. There's a really commanding speech Marmee has later in the film, and the score almost starts to muffle her dialogue, and I'm just like, if we, her performance is so terrific in that scene, and displays such power of emotion, that I really just like, we can really dial the music back here, guys. Let her performance do the talking, and let the music sort of subtly accentuate that, rather than needing the music to do the heavy lifting, which wasn't necessary in that moment. It started to distract at certain points. There's another thing as well that, and this might be very specific to me, because Emmett Till's physical deformity and how he was deformed by that attack is such an important key part of the story. It would be difficult to get away from that. In the initial scene where they see him in the mortuary, he is shown very, very explicitly, the camera kind of tracing him up from his very bloated feet, right the way to his, really kind of deteriorated, destroyed head. and it's initially you don't initially see him, and then it kind of slowly pans up above a table, and you kind of get a brief kind of look at him from further away. And I wasn't expecting it to push in, but it did. And whilst I would never say that the film as a whole tonally is salacious or exploitative, something didn't entirely sit right with me about the level of detail with which they zoomed in on the chaos wreaked on his body. Other people might feel very differently about the presentation, and also how that sort of links to the subject matter and the very kind of specific details of this particular story.
I think
But
I think for me, if you're going to do this story, there isn't any other way to do it than to go into that kind of detail. I mean, it is a shocking thing to show, but that was what she wanted the world to see.
mhm.
That the pure ugliness of the situation. So I kind of understand. We're not used to being, confronted with that in film. Especially not a child. We're not used to seeing that kind of um, explicit, the aftermath of explicit violence and horror on a young person. But I think from what the film is trying to do and what this woman, what she was trying to say, what the whole movement of her doing this open castic thing was about. I think it's right for them to kind of show the body, because that is what she wanted people to see. So in a way, I think it's kind of carrying on that legacy and confronting people with the hardest kind of truth, quite early on in the film. So yeah, although I understand where you're coming from, I think it would have been a mistake for them to conceal the body. Her argument and her kind of battle with truth was to show it in all its horror.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastically put there, Chloe. And I think it's totally right what you said. I don't think they should have completely concealed him. I think maybe there was just perhaps they could have maybe dialed back the length of time, and because they do very slowly pan across his body in that scene. I think maybe they could have just, from my perspective, just maybe dialed it back just a little bit. But I do think that key thematic point about the severity of what they did to him, and how showing that and shocking the nation with it, what that did and sparked for the civil rights movement, I think that's entirely vital to the story. So I think in this case, I would rather they went in too much than not at all. But yeah, maybe that's just my personal preference. Maybe they could have just been slightly more restrained in that. But overall, it wasn't a deal breaker for me. I still think this is a very solid biopic that is very kind of emotively touching on a topic that more people should be aware of. I was kind of surprised that a film hadn't been made, at least not one that I can immediately think of, had been made about it up until this point. But yeah, I'm for that very reason, I'm glad it exists.
What's your rating for Till?
I think a B plus.
That's it for all of our reviews on our first episode. So just to round off, Billy, releases that are ahead of us, some of the things that you're going to be seeing. What is on your agenda?
So I think we have Babylon towards the end of the week, the new Damien Chazelle film, chronicle of the debauchery and excess and sort of formative stages of Hollywood, I think in the 20s and 30s. Then looking to next week, we have The Fabelmans, Steven Spielberg's long-awaited sort of examination of his formative years as becoming inspired to be a filmmaker and pursuing that artistic route. There's a reissue of one of my favorite dramas, A Woman Under the Influence, 1975 film from John Cassavetes. That's this weekend. Also a documentary based on a life of a famous photographer, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, which is being touted as the potential winner for best documentary. And I think A Man Called Otto as well, if we can squeeze that one in.
Thank you to everyone for listening to our first episode. I'm so excited to be doing this. I feel like the people have spoken, Billy. We've waited long enough to hear your thoughts.
Yes, we've both had so many wonderful messages, saying how excited people were to hear my thoughts, and to also hear us both come together again in a filmmaking discussion podcast capacity. And yeah, everyone's support and admissions of excitement have been, very heartening and yes, very, very much appreciated. And yes, I'm just having an absolute blast doing this with you again, Chloe. I'm really grateful that we
Likewise,
can
likewise.
get this in the diary on a weekly basis.
So thank you very much, Billy, for sharing your thoughts, and please tune in next week where we're going to go through all of those fantastic new releases that Billy just mentioned. That's all from us, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.